Thank you for being here with us today. I'm Rowena Chiu. I'm a Harvey Weinstein survivor and I'm a Me Too activist and advocate. And I'm really delighted to be here today with Shiori Ito, who is a filmmaker for Black Box Diaries. And I'll allow Shiori to introduce herself a little.
Thank you. Yes, should I look at you or should I look at you? I don't know, but I will look at you.
It is entirely up to
So
you.
yes, I'm a journalist and a documentary filmmaker, and this is my first feature documentary film called Black Box Diaries. And yeah, right after this, we're gonna screen it here in East Bay. I'm very excited to meet you. Thank you for having me.
I'm equally excited to meet you, and I really thank you for the time that you're taking to discuss the film a little bit with us and the audience to share with the audience of 8Asians a little bit about the background to how you made it and your pivotal role in the Me Too movement in Japan. So I'm going to just start by asking, when you thought of making the documentary, at what point in the process, because I saw through the documentary that your involvement with the Me Too movement in Japan is a long journey, and I've also had a long journey, so I appreciate that journey. So could you explain a little more about where in the journey of trying to make your story public and of going to the police and going to the courts and going to various non-profits, as we saw you take that journey, at what point did you decide to turn this into such an emotive documentary about your experience?
Well, so the time that I decided to make it into documentary film was almost right after I went public, and I saw how it is difficult for Japanese media especially to talk about this issue. It was exactly half a year before the Me Too movement started. So, and in Japan we have very strong stigma against sexual violence, and it wasn't really unheard of to speak about that openly.
Yeah.
But I was wishing once I went public, there would be more investigation of my case and more collaborator to find out what happened. But it didn't happen the way I hoped for. So I decided to write my book first, but it was more purely on journalistic base. It was based on my recordings and documenting. So I took out all my emotion out. But as a documentary filmmaker, I wanted to do something with it. But I never made a film, only made a film for TV, so I had no idea how. And from there, the whole process took 8 years.
Yes.
And 4 years of editing. So it's been a whole new interesting journey for me.
And I particularly, in the film, I particularly enjoyed the juxtaposition between the pieces of the film that are very private, that either you're speaking to the camera directly or you're there with your flatmates, and we're seeing the behind the scenes, how the sausage is made, so to speak, and then that's juxtapositioned with footage from public incidents, like people calling out to you in the street or demonstrations, or that really pivotal moment when they announce the verdict. So I want to take you to those private moments that you shot where you're directly talking to the camera. Some of those pieces are in English. And so was it your intention that the movie should reach international audiences, as Japanese audiences, as well as Japanese audiences? And can you tell us a bit about your thinking around that?
Sure. Well, so how we started filming was right after I went public, I got a Skype call from my producer, Hannah Acklin. She's Swedish journalist, but living in London, and she said, I know it's been quite hard for you to live in Japan and it's not safe for you, so why don't you just move here and we will figure out what you can do here. Right. But I didn't know her, and I'm like, what? Who are you? Are you sure you can stay at your place? But then I did anyways, because I really needed the help. And since we met, she is a journalist. She never also made a film, but we decided to start filming together. And so she came back to Japan when I was about to publish my book, and all the investigation was still going, saying no one can harm Swedish. Still, we have highest standard of human rights, and so she became like my human shield and cameraman. So whenever I'm speaking, because she didn't speak doesn't speak Japanese, of course,
Yeah.
but she's somehow following all the action.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was talking to her,
Yeah.
but she wasn't like hired cameraman, you know. She was my friend. She was, the person who believed in storytelling and decided to be a human shield for me. So yeah, she was my buddy, and so I needed to speak her in English. So that's what happened. But later on, of course, I had other friend of mine from Japan behind the camera, so maybe sometimes I was talking to them in Japanese. But generally speaking, I find that it's much easier to talk about sexual violence in English because maybe I can distance myself, but also I feel like in Japanese language we have such a limited way of expressing your emotion,
Yes.
anger, so on. So, for instance, when this, when this incident took place, I tried to say stop, but I was raised in what was the mindset of I need to speak politely to older people and men. So I said, please stop, and that didn't, of course, work out. So I had to say fuck off. And but that's the thing, we don't have that kind of word in Japanese. So I think for that it's really important. And now I have a little session sometimes with my girlfriend to learn how to say fuck off.
If I may say, I think that the language, even in English, around sexual assault has evolved a lot. So my own assault took place in '98, and I would say that back in '98, it was very difficult to express sexual assault. So in fact, when I was talking about as a young woman myself at 24, we would often talk about my boss tried to sleep with me. But what does that even mean? Because there's no sleeping in the room happening. So the evolution of these words like sexual assault, and certainly the language around body autonomy and consent, has really only become more commonplace. I mean, these words existed, but they weren't in social discourse until recently. So it's interesting to hear you share that about the limitations of the Japanese language around sexual assault. And I believe that the work you're doing, which is desperately important to raise awareness about sexual assault in Japan, will itself cause the language to evolve. So I just wanted to encourage you with that. And I also wanted to say that it's very interesting what you shared about the intimacy of being filmed by both your friend Hannah and then later your friend who spoke Japanese, because I think it's very obvious in the shots that you're talking to a friend. So then my next question about that is, if you had, with the filming of these segments in English, and now of course the attention on the film is being shown in East Bay today, and I understand it was at Sundance, how has the film landed with Japanese audiences, given that some of it is in English and it's had this international attention? Is it seen mostly as an international co-production rather than a Japanese film? And how does that impact the way it's viewed within Japan?
We haven't landed in Japan yet, so we don't know that yet. We're hoping that we're gonna have a release in Japan. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they react. Despite the language differences, it's such a universal story, and it took place in Japan. And I feel like once you're in a theater together, you share your own, like you reflect yourself no matter what, if you ever encounter such a thing. But I believe everyone have been there some level or someone close to them. So I don't think there will be, it will be seen as international, but we'll see.
At various points in the journey, with the things that you had already done, just simply speaking out about the assault in the first place, taking it to court, and then writing a book, I see that there are various points in the film where you're accused of being disloyal to Japan, or resisting the government, or bringing shame to your family, and so on. Do you think that, and obviously I believe those things to be erroneous, I must say, and I'm very sorry that you face this kind of criticism. But do you think that the film will elevate that? Do you think there'll be further criticisms of, how sexual assault survivors are bringing shame to family, or do you think the discourse around that has changed since you made the film and brought your case forward?
Well, I mean, this, speaking up and these online backlash or whatever you call online, troller, it happens anyways, no matter what. But I do believe if you go to cinema, it's a completely different experience. You devoted your time of 104 minutes of your life, and you sit with other people. So I feel like it's gonna be, if they can come to cinema, it's gonna be a different experience. But now, I start remembering, and now it's a bit going back to your last question, but like when I spoke about my own experience, they were like, she must be non-Japanese because no true Japanese women wouldn't speak such a shameful thing. And then it follows whatever you say about, you're putting shame to Japan or you're anti-Japan, you're trying to destroy our reputation. But because I love where I'm from and because I love the people who's living in Japan, I want to do my work to, make it easier, better society to live in. But I have no control of these people. And what was really significant about 2017 October when New York Times and New Yorker released Harvey Weinstein case is that of course it was visible, you spoke up, but it was clearly more addressed, and you gotta have that visibility, very more visible, so that we can talk about it, so that we can face it. And so they might take it as shame and so on, but at some point you really need to face it. So, and it should be earlier than later. So and I think I never got used to these online trollers, but now I have amazing assistant who goes through my messages to just make sure that I don't get surprised with all the files. So I learned how to deal with these things.
And I've been very subject to online trolling as well, so I have deep sympathy for that. So actually what you said about the events of October 2017 leads me on to another question. Obviously, as somebody who is part of the global Me Too movement, or the Me Too movement here in America, I'm really curious to hear from you whether you felt that what happened in October 2017 with the publication of the article about Harvey Weinstein, did that change things for you in Japan in terms of your journey, in terms of encouraging you to speak out? To what extent did the global movement or the US movement have any impact on the way that people regarded your story in Japan?
It was clearly not a direct impact right away, but that was the time I was releasing my book about the race about the same day, and first public reaction, first email that I got into my email box was from women asking to stop whatever I'm doing. I'm very, shameful as a woman, Japanese woman, and many things. And when I read that email, I felt so isolated. But on the other hand, on the other part of the world, there are women showing solidarity. And that was for me personally a huge support. And I think after the movement became bigger, New York Times covered my story, and many Japanese major newspaper couldn't directly cover my story, but they kind of re-imported story according to New York Times.
Right.
New York Times covered that. So that really helped, and I learned really good lesson. Sometimes it's really hard for journalists who want to, try to put the story out there, but you have the editors who's stopping you, but then you can just kind of re-import the story. So this is what we kind of did with this film. It's really hard to still openly share in Japan, but we could, start our journey from outside because it's such a universal issue.
Yes.
And hopefully
Yes.
bring it back.
And you could say that you got, accreditation at Sundance or here in San Francisco, and then you can take the film back to Japan, and it gives you international endorsement to go into an area that's very tender, because I can see that there are political and societal restrictions. So I have a series of questions actually about how you think that external forces can help your story. So my first question is, how do you think the global Me Too movement can help platform your story and get greater traction both inside and outside of Japan? And I know you partly answered that by the idea of you receiving international status helps you open doors in Japan. But given where you are at with raising visibility about this issue, is there a way that the global Me Too movement can assist with your efforts in Japan?
I believe it's been a huge force, especially in media. That now they are not scared to cover these stories. They know how to handle, they know how to talk to survivors, most of the journalists, and how important to, just show to our people, citizens, that it's really happening next to you, and we gotta do something. But unfortunately, when it comes to law change, I don't think we had a huge success. There were some good updates in Japan, but about the consent, it's not yet. The consent is not written in your law, so it's not about consent. And if it's not about consent, right? So
we don't have any meaningful victory.
Exactly. So I am quite disappointed in that way that how word has been shifting, changing. But then I may be feeling like maybe we are not reaching enough to these people who's making the law. And so that's my biggest question and challenge now. As a storyteller, is it possible to reach that person, or how globally can we make that happen? So for me, traveling with this film is actually the journey to learn what I can do, what we can do.
Yes, yes. And I will say that I think as hard as it is to make cultural and societal change, I think we need to do that first, therefore raise voices, raise awareness through this amazing film that you've made and other ways, and I would say that legal and policy change come much slower. So that's certainly been true.
Much slower. I mean, to let you know, we didn't change our life law for 110 years. So you see how slow, so it's maybe kind of faster for them, but
that's right. And that's because these institutions that are set up by power structures that have already been in place are incredibly slow to change. I want to return to that question later because I think it's very interesting, but I wanted to ask you a series of questions about allyship. So, my first question there was about the allyship between the global Me Too movement and the local Me Too or in-country Me Too movement for you in Japan. My second question about allyship is, of course, one of the most moving scenes in the film is where you are on the phone and you're crying to the doorman of the Sheraton Hotel, and he is one of the big voices that kind of come forward and support your story of the events of that night. So my question for you around that is, how do you think males can be better allies in the Me Too movement? I'm frequently being asked this question too, because I think here the Me Too movement is seen as a women's movement or a feminist movement. Right. So that means men who are allies, who want these stories to come out more, really struggle with their role and their voice. Right. So how would you say to the men out there that actually want to help and want to support your story and to support the Me Too movement more broadly, what would you say to them about how they can help and be true allies?
Yeah, well, fortunately I have many allies. I have many amazing allies, the producer and my friends who always, when I was doing investigation, they made sure nothing would happen, so they stayed around me and so on. But especially in Japan, because Me Too, saying Me Too was seen as a dangerous action. You might lose your job, or because there's no protection. Also, in Japanese, there's a saying that sticking nail must be hammered. So you don't want to get hammered, But so when we discovered how it's in the beginning, how difficult to have the Me Too movement successful in Japan, we said, why don't we say we too? Because it's not just you, me, as a survivor who has to speak up. but it should be, you know, bystander who's been witnessing, or friends, or maybe possible perpetrator can join and stop it in any form, you know. So that's sort of a collaborative way that we kind of talked about. As it's hard to say me, we can say we, so that we can change whatever you are at. So the doorman, he decided to take the risk and step forward, and he was bystander. That's the word, yeah. So yeah, so he's the hero to me, and he's a great example.
Yeah, I think what he did was tremendous, and you could see that emotion when he was able to come forward, or willing to come forward, that clearly meant a lot to you. And so then my third layer of questions about allyship actually pertain to the people who'll be watching this film later this afternoon, and also in other cinemas around North America. Obviously, that your film is beautifully made and is a beacon of hope to sort of tell a story in this way and to have visibility into film festivals. So my final question for you is, for folks that come in the audience and watch this film through film festivals and so on, how do you think they can be allies to you? How can they raise awareness about your film? And what would you say if you could speak directly to an audience member who comes to see your film and is moved by it and moved to action? What specific things do you think that they could do to help your film?
It's been amazing to just pop up for the Q&A and start feeling a gushing emotion from the audience, and realizing, yeah, everyone has something to say, something to share. So I just want them to share what they think about the film, what they maybe not need to talk about the film, but then, yeah, it's kind of like reflection moment with yourself, to be vulnerable and to find a way how we can use our own voice to tell your own story, or tell others, you know, story. And well, from my egoistic point of view, we just really want to screen in Japan. So if you can spread the good word, we can do it in Japan. Yes. So that's
I have every confidence you will.
Oh, thank you.
I'm looking forward to reading in the press when this movie gets screened in Japan. And can I just close by saying, as one Asian sexual assault survivor to another, I know fully how difficult it is to speak up in spite of, you know, your Asian heritage. For me, it took a long time because my parents didn't know what happened to me, and I was very worried about being judged by my own community and my own culture. And so I just want to thank you for having the courage to do this, to have spoken up in the first place, to go through that harrowing experience that is a court case, and then also to make this film. It's a significant achievement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Being chased.
Amazing.